Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide.
Hey, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
We are back and hopefully sounding okay to everybody. We intermittently have had some sound problems, but I think we're okay. So we are here to talk about a topic that I think is really important and relates to the training that we all receive. But before we do that, we have some shout outs to do. And the first one is in our home state of New Jersey. Actually, it's the first two, if you think about it. Within our home state of New Jersey, and I'm starting with that because it's not all the time that our home state is number one in our ratings, but here you are, New Jersey, you are number one. And there are two locations within New Jersey that are like almost tied for the number of listeners. Those are places that I am both near and enjoy. It's Red Bank and South Amboy. So thank you, the people of Red Bank and South Amboy, for listening to us and putting New Jersey in the coveted number one spot on our ratings.
Yay.
Because again, that isn't always the case.
It's never the case.
Interestingly, it's never the case. You're right. Interestingly, around the world, we have at the number two in around the world, right under the United States, is a location that was the first one. We think the first one we ever shouted out, and then it moved in those ratings, and now it's back in the first two, and that's Guam.
Yay, Guam! I feel like we've come full circle now.
Full circle with Guam, but we don't want you to leave. Keep telling people to listen to us. We really appreciate it. And we hope that topics like this are meaningful to everybody around the world and around the United States. This topic has to do with a cycle of misunderstanding that is severely impacting a group of children. It turns out, according to the current statistics, that 1 in 6 children who are eventually diagnosed on the spectrum of autism are expelled from their early childhood programs. And it has to do with a lot of misunderstandings. People assuming things like the children who exhibit certain behaviors are just misbehaving when it could be a sign of something else.
Yeah.
And we're not qualified to diagnose or know that. So, we also have these age-old assumptions about children and their behavior that really shouldn't apply anymore because we have more knowledge now. The question is, how do we get this knowledge to the practitioners, to the people? And the people, I think, being the early childhood professionals, the pediatricians, the behaviorists. Like, how do we get this information out there? And in that pecking order of who needs the information, who gets information, I feel like early childhood classroom staff are like the last ones to know.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's because of a lot of reasons. I think it's a lot of we're not allowed to diagnose, so why do we need to know that information? I think it's, those children, what are the likelihood of you having a child in the class that exhibits this? I think it's a lot of stuff. And I think when we go to these professional developments, most people aren't choosing that class because there's usually a class about special needs children at these workshops that people go to. I don't think people are choosing that class because they think that's for the special educators. I think the people think it's for special educators, and I think they think, well, I have so much other stuff that I want to learn. Let me take the other classes first. I think. I'm not really sure if that's the reason, but I feel like it should almost be a mandatory at this point to have a class.
There's a big difference between diagnosing a child and knowing how to interact with a child.
Yes.
And, we're not trained, or at least I know I wasn't trained in how to work with children who are on the spectrum of autism, how to help them with their behaviors, how to recognize who should be referred. I'm not saying recognize who is on the spectrum of autism. We're not qualified to do that. Only certain people are qualified to do that. But we need to know when to refer them and not just assume this child's behavior is XYZ and so they got to go. We have to know. Now, not every family is going to take that advice and go for the evaluation. So in that case, we have to know how to work with these children.
Right. But I also think, going back to the referral that you were talking about, is when I was a young teacher, I didn't even know the process of the referral, right? Especially when I was working in like those childcare centers and the private preschools where you had to go through a different, external kind of thing. When I worked in the public school, it was like, okay, the child study team's right here and I can navigate that. But this is like, especially if you're a new teacher, you might not know where do you go, who do you call, what is the process here?
You're right.
How do I involve the parents in this process? You might not know. And I feel like that would be a very valid class to have as an educator. And I feel like it should be required in the first year that you're teaching, saying these are the classes that you were required to have.
We're required to do professional development. All of us are. And I think you're right. I think that there are certain pieces of professional development that are mandated based on grants and the flow of money and things like that. I think, in addition to health and safety, professional development related to special education, special needs, autism, that should be part of the required trainings that we do, because otherwise, how do people who did not become educated in special education, how do they know how to work with these children? And it's not that we want to expel them, by the way. I think pretty much everybody who's listening would agree it's not our goal as we go into this profession to expel children. Our goal is to help children. And then unfortunately, when we don't know what to do, when we don't have tools in our toolbox to handle it, programs feel like, well, this is a danger to everybody or this is a distraction to everybody and we don't know what to do. So you have to go elsewhere. Some children benefit from going elsewhere if they go to the right programs. But even if families are going to have their children evaluated, there's a waiting period. There's a period of time that early intervention and special education have to address the request for the evaluation. It doesn't happen right away. And these children still need to have adults, even during that waiting period, who know how to make this a comfortable, productive, loving environment for them.
Yeah. And not to mention, it's the parents' prerogative if they want to even have their child evaluated. So even if you have these suspicions that something might be a diagnosable issue, it's up to the parent. And the parent might say, I don't want my child diagnosed. So then it's like, now this child's in your class and they're not going to leave. They're not going to leave. They're not going to get diagnosed. So how are you going to interact with this child who's going to stay in your class? It's not even necessarily the waiting period, which can be quite long. It's also up to the parent, so we should be welcoming these students in and knowing how to interact with them so that it's beneficial for everyone involved.
Think about what damage is done when we don't know how to work with a child and when that child keeps being moved from program to program to program after being suspended or expelled. It's like when you drop that pebble in the water and it just ripples. I think the damage just ripples out. And at this point, there's just such a lack of mandatory training, and that pediatricians have started to have to be trained in autism and developmental delay. I don't know how extensive it is. I'm not a pediatrician, but that's a fairly recent thing that they had to have some sort of training or a certain number of training hours or credits in it. And there are some behavioral specialists who are very well versed and others are less so.
Right.
And maybe they could steer people to someone who knows more than them if they're, if they feel like that's what needs to be done.
Yeah.
But early childhood programs are a completely different thing. People enroll their children and then you really learn about them, unless the family comes and says, here's what's going on with my child. Can you deal with that here? But that's a really rare thing in my experience.
Yeah. That's rare. That's
because most of the time they're not diagnosed yet when we get them.
Right. That's correct. Yeah.
Right.
They're not.
And
or they're in the process, and they might not.
Right.
Be,
and they might not be in the preschool years. They will probably be diagnosed once they're school age. Right. But in the years that we have them, it's a sensitive thing. And like you said, it's the family's prerogative to go. It's their decision if they're going to go and have the child evaluated. And some people just are not ready yet. We need to give them time. Right. How do you give people time to process this, think about it, and come to that decision if everybody's dealing with the fact that we don't know what to do with their child?
Right. 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 And then, like, how do you think that makes not only the child feel like, oh, this teacher doesn't know how to deal with me, so now I'm kind of pushed aside or not, not involved in the group. And then how does it make the parents feel to know, like, oh, you're not treating my child the way that is going to help them learn? You know what I mean? You're not, how does that make you feel? And you don't want anybody feeling like that when they walk through your classroom doors. I don't, at least, I don't want anybody feeling like that. I don't want the child feeling like that. I don't want the parents feeling like that. I don't want other teachers to feel like that. I don't want other parents to feel like I just want everybody to know, like, oh, okay, yes, Miss Allison knows how to interact with the child no matter what their developments are, and I feel confident leaving my child in her care, and
a good part of those 1 out of 6 are expelled is probably just people not feeling like they are competent. And why would they?
Yes. Why would they?
I'm thinking about, even like credential requirements, teacher, college teacher programs, unless you are also studying special education.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time people spend learning about this sort of thing.
I mean, I don't think much at all, but I went to school a really long time ago, so I don't know if the teacher programs are different than when I went. When I went, I think we got like one class on special education, and it was like the whole range of special needs. It was in there. They might have glanced over a little bit of all of them, and that was it. And then you moved on because they're like, oh, they'll be pulled out for services. You don't have to worry about it, but you really do. Okay. Because especially now, the children are very much mainstreamed into your classroom. Even if they receive services, they likely don't leave the classroom to get them anymore. It's not like it used to be very segregated, I feel. And it's not like that now. So you need to really know how to interact with these children, how to teach the other children how to interact with that child too, because that's a different way of playing sometimes, it's a different way to communicate with that child.
Yeah. And, you were saying, oh, I think maybe I had to take one course. And then there's the people like me at my age group who didn't have to take any. And we're still out there in the workforce, folks.
Yes.
We can't just wait on people now who might be learning a little more, maybe, but I'm not even sure. Right. We can't just sit and wait for them. There's a whole workforce out there that has not taken any kind of coursework or professional development in these sort of approaches and interactions that children with special education needs need and children on the spectrum of autism need. And so, folks, when you go to conferences or when someone says to you, what do you want to learn about? Here's an idea. Instead of saying something that's so often said, which is, I want to learn about how to deal with children's behavior. Maybe we should be saying, I want to learn about how special education needs impact behavior and what to do about it. I want to know about autism and how that behavior looks, and how it looks
Mhm.
in children in different areas of the spectrum of autism. I want to know how to advise a family to go and get their child evaluated.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we should be
That's what,
saying, because
yes.
so many people request, I know because I get the requests, so many people request training about behavior,
It's
and
always
then they'll
about
get on
behavior.
that call
Yeah.
always, and they'll
Yeah.
but then they get on that call and they start describing children sometimes, and I'm thinking to myself, that child needs, and I'll say to them, I think that child needs to be evaluated.
Yeah.
And one of two things happens. Well, one thing is they're like, okay, maybe we don't know who to refer to, or, and
Mhm.
then the other thing that sometimes happens is that they say, well, the family doesn't want to get them evaluated, and we don't know what to do. If we
Yeah.
had a half a clue what to do, the parent decision wouldn't be as dramatic.
That's true. And I do feel like these teachers who are going for behavior management techniques in these workshops, those behavior management techniques that you might learn are great for some students, but might not work for your child with special needs because they're a different case.
Yes.
So, yeah, if you're trying to apply, like, hey, I went to this great workshop about behavior modification, and you're trying to use that with a child who has autism or a different special need, and it's not working, and you're like, whoops, see, I tried. Yeah, it's not working because they need a modified system, right? It's not going to be the same behavior techniques that you would use with your typically developing child. It's not going to work.
Well, what are you and I always saying, Allison? We're always saying there is no cookie cutter. So these people who
Yes.
come in with this, here's how you solve your
Yep.
behavior
Your
problem, that's a
behavior
cookie
problem.
cutter thing. And that may
Yeah.
work for some children, but you're right. It's not going to work for every child. There's no one
Right.
thing that works for every child.
Right.
If
Correct.
if we're
Yeah.
going to break this cycle of misunderstanding, it has to do with educating the workforce, and the workforce realizing that we need to be educated in it because it'll serve
Yes.
us best and
Yes.
it'll serve the children best, right?
Yeah.
If we know how to adjust for different children and what to do and how to speak with families and when to refer for evaluation and when to just kind of know this doesn't meet the level of evaluation,
Right.
then probably we would all be better off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're right.
You know,
You can't go buy a program. You can't just
you
go,
can't,
okay, this
yeah,
is our
and say
program.
magically, and then when it doesn't work, be
Yeah.
like, oh, there's something wrong with him. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
find so interesting is I just learned that the town that's next to mine, the police officers all went through training on how to handle autism. So when they pull somebody over or if they arrive at somebody's house for a call,
Mhm.
they know how to handle these different kinds of situations. And that was one of them. And so now in the town next to mine, you can get a little card if you have a diagnosis, and you could put it in your car and hang it in your window so that the police officer knows, oh, I need to handle this person differently than I would, say, somebody else that I pull over, which I found to be so interesting that now the police officers are first off getting more training than the teachers are, but also I feel like this is becoming a worldwide thing, as it should, because I think people are realizing everybody has different abilities and different disabilities and
Yes.
different special needs, and they should be handled accordingly, right? So what a police officer would do when they pull somebody over that has typical developing things might be totally different than if you pull over somebody who has autism. So, and I think they're realizing that now. So, and I think that's good. I think maybe if it gets more mainstream, then more people in the education world will want to learn about it too.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah.
And I also heard, I did hear that about police officers. I don't think it's, I think it's becoming more universal. I also
Yeah.
heard that there's some training being given to people like airline personnel, how to work
Oh.
with passengers who may
Yeah.
be on the spectrum of autism. I don't know how universal that is, but I did hear about that somewhere. So you're
But
right.
maybe-
Why are we the last to know?
Why are we the last to know? Because honestly, okay, people get kicked off of airplanes too. And sometimes you
Yeah.
wonder, okay, what if that person has something that made that behavior different. It's not, you know what I mean? So like, yeah, learning the signs of like, okay, we should kick this person off. They're being, rude, or no, wait, there's something else going on here. So let's be kind and figure it out together, knowing how to
Yeah,
deal
you're
with
right.
that. Yeah.
You are right.
Because
All
they're
right.
not just in schools. They graduate and they become adults, and adults, that's what you need to do. You need to learn how to deal with all sorts of different situations and how to interact with all sorts of different people.
That's right. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope, folks, that you'll give some thought to those children whose behaviors feel so challenging to you and the fact that we don't know why. And again, I'm not trying to diagnose. I'm not saying every child who exhibits challenging behavior may have autism. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we don't even know when to know. We don't even know what to
No,
do. We don't
I know.
recognize these. So many of us have such little knowledge that it's something that I think we have to advocate for and we have to stand for. And for goodness sake, if you go to those conferences with Alison, those sessions are not just for teachers who are called special
Yes.
education teachers. They're for everybody.
Everybody.
Okay, folks, we are going to hope that you do things like look for our website, howpreschoolteachersdoit.com, and send us messages and let us know how it's going. And if you feel like your program actually does something about this, please let us know. We would love to talk about it on a future episode.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody go and do the best that you can and request this stuff. We will catch you next time on the podcast.
Bye, peeps.